Like all people who've left high office, you look refreshed and quite healthy.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, isn't it? There's something about having a bit more time to yourself.
Yeah.
And what about a bit more sleep?
A bit more sleep, and also, I mean, as I'm sure we'll discuss, the business of Home Secretary involves looking at a lot of very unhappy-making things, a lot of tragic things going on, and you need to engage with the families and the community to be of any use, and obviously that's a bit draining.
Five deaths in London in the last few days. 3 of them under 18.
Yeah.
Under 18, and they're dying.
Yes.
And you've said police cuts in police numbers, 20,000 police officers cut since the Tories came to power, 7,000 neighbourhood police officers. This doesn't have an impact.
Listen, Susanna, I know these figures, and I just think we do an enormous disservice to the people who are suffering in these communities by saying it's all about policing. It's about so much more than that.
Is it not self-evident that if you cut the number of police officers out on the streets, people are more vulnerable?
Well,
and I give you an example, because a police officer, in the wake of one of these teenage stabbings, said more officers were being deployed on the streets right now to help prevent further violent crime. We have hundreds of additional duty officers on the streets of every single borough. Only together can we bring down the level of violence in London.
And
if
after
one of these killings, the police officer in charge says we're going to flood the streets with police officers, there is a direct link.
But they did flood the streets with police officers. This past few months, there has been so many police officers on the streets in London, in the areas where these attacks are likely to take place, and yet it continues. It is self-evident that if you had no police on the streets, there would be more crime. But you just completely misunderstand the scale of the problem and the causes of these crimes. If you say, if we have more police on the road, on the streets, then it would all be over. And I tell you what, if you talk to the families, they will say the same thing to you. They will say it's about the communities, it's about a change in culture, and what they need is help with their predominantly young boys.
Why don't we make it very, very difficult for people to carry knives on the streets of this city?
Yep.
You know, when we dealt with gun crime after Dunblane, we said if you're caught with a gun, 5 years in prison. Right? These kids walk around with impunity, carrying large knives. Why is that allowed?
Well, it's not. A, it's not, and B, we've passed a law, which we did under the last government, saying if you're caught twice with a knife, you have a custodial sentence. But can I tell you what it is at the core of this? What the core of this is the drug trade. It's the fact that there's much more cocaine available than ever before. It's cheaper, use is up, demand is up, price is down, and, you know, people suffering because of it is the direct consequence of overusage of cocaine and its availability, and it's clamping down on the drug trade that we need.
And how come that isn't? I mean, you're denying or telling me that I don't understand that police numbers would bring these numbers down. I mean, how do we know if there weren't more police we could bring these numbers down? And how do we know that if we had more police, we wouldn't be able to get a grip on the drugs trade?
But don't you think it's better to look at where you know the problem is? If we know that the problem is the dissemination of all these drugs, then that's where we should put the focus. If we know that if we intervene early with these young boys, there's a lot of great charities like the LEAP project that I went to see earlier in the year, and if we fund them, and that's what the new Home Secretary is doing, making sure there's more money going into these youth charities that go into communities that try and stop young boys picking up knives in the first place. Isn't that where we should
When New York had a massive drugs problem back in the 70s and 80s, some mayors, consecutive mayors, got together and they went hammer and tongs to drive the drugs out of the city. And they did it by flooding the streets with policemen.
Yes.
Right? We are doing the opposite.
No,
we're saying, you've now said there's a massive drugs problem that is causing a lot of this knife crime, right? I'm not disputing that is probably true. What I am disputing is that our answer to combating the drug explosion is the complete opposite to what was successful in somewhere like New York, where they flooded the streets with coppers. What the British public want to see, particularly in London, they want to see bobbies on the beat.
And they are right.
And what your government's done over the last 10 years is take bobbies off the beat.
No, what we've done...
Okay,
let me just tell you, in the past 18 months, we've made sure that the police and crime commissioners have access to more money, £450 million this year, to have more police officers. So they do have access to more police officers.
You don't have to defend the indefensible anymore.
No,
You're not in the government,
No, I know what I'm doing here.
Theresa May led the charge in slashing police numbers. She stood in front of the policemen, she lectured them, she said, we're going to reduce police numbers, took great credit for doing this, right?
And crime came down.
Well, actually, knife crime has exploded ever since.
Violent crime is up.
No, in the past 2 to 3 years, knife crime, and particularly young crime, the perpetrators and the victims becoming so much younger.
But do you think you've made Britain a safer place as a government in the last 8 years by removing 20,000 police officers from the street? Seriously?
Well, we have said that we can have more police officers, and that's why we introduced new money.
Do you
to
think you've
make
made it safer?
Well, it's very difficult to prove the sort of counterintuitive. What I would say, though, is that it's not just the UK. You talked about the US. The US, in 2014 to 15, started to see exactly the same as what we've seen. And cuts in police numbers in the UK have not led to the increase in violence in the US.
I just think people will think you're just in denial about it.
But why aren't you engaging with me on the problem, which is not just...
We are. You're saying the problem is
police
drugs.
officers, and you're telling me that I'm wrong.
But are you saying police officers will solve the problem?
I would like more police officers.
Yeah.
And
definitely,
you aren't getting them.
Because as a parent of teenagers, I feel like my children aren't necessarily
I'm
safe.
also a parent, Susanna, and I know that having more police officers is part of it, and I won't deny that. The fact is, that's why we put more money into making it available
I think youth
for this year.
services is part of it. I think
Well-
trying to get people to, you know, provide information and still feel safe is part of it. I think
course.
tackling gang culture is part of it.
Well, let's
I think
admit-
it's a multifaceted
Absolutely.
thing. But I cannot understand how you can deny that having more police officers wouldn't
I
be
have
part
said
of the
that we
solution.
acknowledge that the police officers are under pressure, which is why more money's been made available. But constantly focusing on police services, I just don't think satisfies the fact that the families, when you talk to them, talk to the families.
Yeah, but I've
They will
talked to a lot of police.
say they need help with their
Anna,
communities.
I've talked to lots of police officers.
Yes.
None of them agree with you.
That's
all the
not
police,
true.
every policeman I've talked to says the cuts have been ridiculous, and the extra pressure on the existing police force has been absolutely down
Well,
to
we acknowledge
the
that they've
ridiculous
got-
amount of cuts that have gone on.
No, well, that hasn't been my experience.
Really?
Yeah, no, my experience.
No policeman said that.
No,
to you.
of course. Police will always want to have more numbers, and that's quite understandable. Everybody in the public service wants to have more numbers in order to do their job better. But they will also acknowledge, and I've had, spent a lot of time, because nothing is more important than keeping young people safe. I spent a lot of time talking to senior police officers about what else we could do to work with the communities, and that's what they want. And I think we have to look at, too, is what has changed? What has changed in our communities that makes it so much easier, apparently, for young people to be controlled and for knives to be available?